Imagine this. You are sitting in a cockpit made of aluminum and steel. The engine in front of you is roaring with over 1,000 horsepower. Your hands are gripping a control stick that feels like it holds your entire life in its balance. And then you look up. The sky is not blue anymore. It is filled with enemy aircraft. Dozens of them. Maybe 50. Maybe more. They are coming from every direction. They are faster than you. They can climb higher than you. They can turn tighter than you. By every measure of conventional warfare, you should be dead in the next 3 minutes. But you are not going to die today, because you are flying a P-40 Warhawk. And you know something that your enemy does not understand. You know that this war is not about having the best aircraft. It is about having the best tactics. It is about understanding your machine so deeply that every weakness becomes a weapon. Every limitation becomes a trap for your enemy. This is a story of how an aircraft that was considered obsolete before the war became one of the most feared weapons in the sky. This is the story of asymmetric warfare at 30,000 feet. This is the story of the P-40 versus the swarm. Let's begin with an honest assessment of the P-40 Warhawk. When the Curtiss P-40 first flew in October 1938, it was already facing criticism. The aircraft was powered by an Allison V1710 engine, a liquid-cooled 12-cylinder power plant that produced approximately 1,000 horsepower in its early variants. This engine was reliable. It was rugged, but it had one critical flaw that would define the entire combat history of the P-40. The Allison engine did not have an effective supercharger for high-altitude performance. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that while the P-40 could reach speeds of approximately 360 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, its performance dropped dramatically at higher altitudes. Above 20,000 feet, the P-40 became sluggish. It lost power. It lost speed. It lost the ability to compete with enemy aircraft that were designed for high-altitude combat. And this was not a minor problem. This was a fundamental limitation that shaped every single tactical decision made by P-40 pilots throughout the entire Second World War. Now compare this to the aircraft that the P-40 would face in combat. In the Pacific Theater, the primary opponent was the Mitsubishi A6M0. This Japanese fighter was a masterpiece of lightweight engineering. It weighed approximately 5,300 pounds fully loaded, compared to the P-40's 8,400 pounds. The Zero could climb at almost 4,000 feet per minute. The P-40 could barely manage 2,000 feet per minute in optimal conditions. The Zero could turn inside the P-40 with embarrassing ease. In a traditional dogfight, a turning battle where both aircraft try to get on each other's tail, the Zero will win almost every single time. Japanese pilots knew this. They were trained to exploit this advantage. They would pull their aircraft into tight spiraling turns, confident that no American fighter could follow them. In the European and North African theaters, the P-40 faced the Messerschmitt Bf-109. This German fighter was one of the most successful combat aircraft ever built. It had superior climb rate, superior high-altitude performance, and in many variants, superior speed. German pilots were among the best trained in the world. They had been fighting since 1939. They knew their aircraft. They knew their tactics. They had confidence built on years of victory. So here was a situation facing P-40 pilots in every theater of the war. They were flying aircraft with inferior climb rate. They were facing enemies with superior turning ability or superior high-altitude performance. They were often outnumbered by significant margins. In the early months of the Pacific War, Japanese pilots had years of combat experience from the war in China. American pilots were fresh from training schools. By every logical calculation, the P-40 should have been swept from the skies within weeks of entering combat. But that is not what happened. To understand how the P-40 survived and thrived in combat, we need to understand a concept that goes far beyond aviation. We need to understand the fundamental nature of asymmetric warfare. Asymmetric warfare occurs when two opposing forces have significantly different military capabilities, strategies, and resources. The weaker force cannot win by playing the same game as the stronger force. If they try to fight on the enemy's terms, they will lose. Guaranteed. But asymmetric warfare offers an alternative path. The weaker force can win by refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. They can win by changing the rules of engagement. They can win by exploiting advantages that the enemy does not even recognize as advantages. The P-40 had exactly two significant advantages over its opponents. The first advantage was dive speed and dive acceleration. The P-40 was a heavy aircraft. That weight, which was such a disadvantage in climbing and turning, became a powerful asset when diving. When a P-40 pushed its nose down and dug toward the earth, it accelerated faster than the Zero. It reached higher terminal velocities than most of its opponents, and most importantly, it remained controllable at speeds that would cause lighter aircraft to experience dangerous compression effects. The Zero, with its lightweight construction and relatively fragile airframe, could not safely follow a P-40 into a steep high-speed dive. Japanese pilots who tried to follow American aircraft in dives often found their controls becoming stiff and unresponsive. Some lost control entirely. Some never pulled out of their dives. The second advantage was ruggedness and survivability. The P-40 was built like a flying tank compared to its opponents. It had self-sealing fuel tanks that could absorb bullet hits without bursting into flames. It had armor plating behind the pilot's seat that could stop machine gun rounds. It had a structural integrity that allowed it to absorb significant damage and keep flying. The Zero had none of these features. Japanese designers had sacrificed protection for performance. A single well-placed burst of gunfire could turn a Zero into a fireball. The fuel tanks had no self-sealing capability. There was no armor protection for the pilot. The lightweight structure that gave the Zero its amazing performance also made it incredibly vulnerable. These two advantages, dive performance and survivability, became the foundation of a completely new approach to aerial combat. Now we arrive at the tactical brilliance that transformed the P-40 from a second-rate fighter into a lethal weapon. The man most credited with developing these tactics was Claire Lee Chennault, a retired United States Army Air Corps officer who became the commander of the American Volunteer Group in China. This unit, which would become famous as the Flying Tigers, operated P-40 aircraft against Japanese forces beginning in December 1941. Chennault understood something that many military theorists of his time did not fully appreciate. He understood that tactical doctrine must be built around the specific capabilities of your equipment, not around abstract theories of how combat should work. Chennault developed a set of rules for P-40 pilots that completely rejected traditional dogfighting concepts. Rule number 1. Never engage in a turning fight with a Zero. This seems obvious in hindsight, but it went against everything that fighter pilots had been taught since the First World War. Aerial combat was supposed to be about maneuvering for position, getting on the enemy's tail, and staying there until you achieved a kill. Chennault said no. If you try to turn with a Zero, you will die. Do not do it, ever. Rule number 2. Always maintain altitude advantage. Altitude is potential energy. It can be converted into speed through diving. P-40 pilots were instructed to always position themselves above the enemy before engaging. If you cannot achieve altitude advantage, you should not engage at all. Wait. Be patient. Let the enemy come to you on terms that favor your aircraft. Rule number 3. Attack from above in diving passes. The standard P-40 attack profile became the high-speed diving pass. Pilots would spot enemy aircraft below them, push their noses down, accelerate to maximum speed, fire a quick burst at the enemy, and then continue diving past and away from the engagement. They would use their excess speed to climb back up to altitude and set up for another pass. Rule number 4. Never slow down in the presence of enemy aircraft. Speed was survival. A P-40 that maintained high speed could always escape by diving away. A P-40 that slowed down a turn was a P-40 that became vulnerable. Pilots were trained to keep their throttles forward and their airspeed high throughout every engagement. Rule number 5. Use the two-ship element as the basic tactical unit. Instead of operating as individual aircraft, P-40 pilots operated in pairs. One pilot would attack, while his wingman covered him and watched for threats. They would alternate roles, with the wingman becoming the attacker after the first pass. This mutual support system dramatically increased survivability. These tactics fundamentally changed the nature of aerial combat. Traditional dogfighting was like two swordsmen circling each other, looking for an opening, engaging in extended duels of skill and reflexes. Chenault's tactics were like a sniper engaging infantry from a hilltop, quick, lethal, and almost impossible to counter if executed correctly. But tactics alone do not tell the full story. We need to understand what the P-40 pilots were actually facing when they encountered enemy formations. The Japanese military doctrine in the early years of the Pacific War emphasized overwhelming force. Japanese commanders would assemble large formations of aircraft for major operations. It was not unusual for P-40 pilots to encounter formations of 30, 40, or even 50 enemy aircraft. This is what we call the swarm. Facing a swarm presents unique psychological and tactical challenges. First, there is the psychological impact. Imagine looking at a sky filled with enemy aircraft, knowing that each one of those aircraft contains a pilot who is trying to kill you. The natural human response is fear and the desire to flee, but fleeing from a swarm is almost impossible. The enemy aircraft will chase you. They will catch you. You cannot outrun them over long distances. Second, there is the tactical problem of situational awareness. With dozens of aircraft in the sky, it becomes extremely difficult to track all potential threats. While you're focused on attacking one enemy aircraft, 3 others might be maneuvering to attack you. The sheer number of threats creates cognitive overload. Third, there is the problem of ammunition conservation. The P-40 carried approximately 200 rounds per gun for its 650 caliber machine guns. That sounds like a lot until you realize that those guns fired at approximately 750 rounds per minute. If you held the trigger down continuously, you would be out of ammunition in approximately 15 seconds. Against a swarm, you could not afford to waste ammunition. Every burst had to count. The tactics developed by Chenault and other P-40 commanders specifically addressed these swarm challenges. Against large formations, P-40 pilots were taught to avoid becoming entangled in the middle of the swarm. The diving attack profile allowed pilots to pass through the enemy formation quickly, emerging on the other side before the enemy could react. Speed was the key to survival against superior numbers. Pilots were also taught to be selective about their targets. You could not attack every enemy aircraft. You had to choose your targets carefully, selecting aircraft that were in vulnerable positions, aircraft that were separated from their formation, aircraft that were not aware of your approach. The element system also helped against swarms. While one pilot made his attack, his wingman was specifically watching for threats. The wingman would call out warnings. He would tell the attacking pilot when to break off. This division of labor helped compensate for the cognitive overload of swarm combat. Let us examine how these tactics played out in actual combat situations. On December 20th, 1941, just 13 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Flying Tigers engaged Japanese bombers attacking Kunming, China. This was the first combat action for the American Volunteer Group. The Japanese formation consisted of 10 Kawasaki Ki, 48 bombers. The Flying Tigers scrambled P-40 aircraft to intercept. Following Chenault's tactics, the P-40 pilots climbed above the bomber formation, then dove through it in high-speed passes. The result was devastating for the Japanese. 4 bombers were shot down. 3 more were damaged so badly that they crashed before reaching their base. The P-40 suffered no losses. Not a single aircraft was shot down. Not a single pilot was killed. This pattern would repeat throughout the Flying Tigers' operational history in China and Burma. Between December 1941 and July 1942, the American Volunteer Group claimed 297 enemy aircraft destroyed. They lost only 14 pilots in combat. Think about that ratio for a moment. An aircraft that was considered obsolete, flown by pilots who were not even officially part of the military, achieved a kill ratio of better than 20-1 against some of the best pilots in the Japanese military. In North Africa, P-40 pilots faced the German Luftwaffe and achieved similar success using adapted versions of the same basic tactics. The Desert Air Force, operating P-40 Warhawks and Kitty Hawks, became one of the most effective Allied fighter forces in the Mediterranean theater. At the Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, P-40 squadrons provided crucial air support for British ground forces. They attacked German supply convoys. They intercepted Luftwaffe bombers. They engaged Messerschmitt fighters using the same dive and extend tactics developed by Chennault half a world away. Squadron leader Clive Caldwell of the Royal Australian Air Force became one of the highest-scoring Allied aces in the North African theater while flying P-40 aircraft. He achieved 20 victories flying the Warhawk, using tactics that emphasize the aircraft's diving ability and rugged construction. There is another dimension to asymmetric warfare that is often overlooked. This is the psychological dimension. When P-40 pilots consistently survived and succeeded against superior enemy aircraft, something changed in their psychology. They developed confidence. They developed a tactical identity. They began to see themselves not as pilots of inferior equipment, but as practitioners of a different and superior way of fighting. This psychological shift was crucial. A pilot who believes his aircraft is inferior will fly defensively. He will avoid combat when possible. He will hesitate at critical moments. He will make decisions based on fear rather than tactical calculation. A pilot who believes in his tactics will fly aggressively. He will seek out combat. He will commit fully to his attack runs. He will trust his training and his equipment to bring him through safely. The P-40 community developed this aggressive confidence despite flying objectively inferior aircraft. They did this by rejecting the traditional metrics of aircraft comparison. They stopped comparing climb rates and turn radii. Instead, they focus on what mattered for their specific tactical approach. Could the P-40 dive fast enough? Yes. Could the P-40 survive hits that would destroy other aircraft? Yes. Could the P-40 deliver accurate fire in a high-speed pass? Yes. If those three things were true, then nothing else mattered. Not the enemy's superior climb rate. Not the enemy's tighter turn radius. Not the enemy's numerical superiority. This is perhaps the deepest lesson of asymmetric warfare. Victory goes not to the force with the best equipment, but to the force that best understands how to use the equipment they have. The P-40 remained in frontline service until 1944, when it was finally replaced by superior aircraft like the P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt. By that time, over 13,000 P-40 aircraft had been produced. They had served in every major theater of the war. They had been flown by American, British, Australian, Chinese, Soviet, and many other Allied air forces. But the legacy of the P-40 extends far beyond its service record. The tactical innovations developed by P-40 pilots influenced fighter doctrine for decades. The concept of energy fighting, using altitude and speed as tactical resources rather than engaging in turning battles, became a fundamental principle of modern air combat. The boom and zoom tactics pioneered by P-40 pilots are still taught to fighter pilots today. Modern combat aircraft with their missiles and advanced avionics still use the same basic principles. Maintain energy advantage. Do not get slow. Attack from positions of advantage. Extend after your attack run. The broader lessons of asymmetric warfare demonstrated by the P-40 have applications far beyond aviation. First lesson, know your equipment completely. Understand not just its specifications, but its real-world capabilities and limitations. The P-40 pilots who survived were the ones who understood exactly what their aircraft could and could not do. Second lesson, refuse to fight on the enemy's terms. If the enemy has advantages in a particular type of engagement, do not engage in that type of fight. Change the rules. Force the enemy to fight on terms that favor your strengths. Third lesson, develop tactics that exploit your specific advantages. Do not copy tactics designed for different equipment in different situations. Build your approach from the ground up based on what you actually have. Fourth lesson, training and doctrine matter more than equipment. The P-40 pilots succeeded not because they had better aircraft, but because they had better tactics and better training for their specific situation. Fifth lesson, psychological confidence must be built on realistic assessment. The P-40 pilots did not pretend their aircraft was superior. They acknowledged its limitations honestly, but they also understood what it could do well, and they built their confidence on that realistic foundation. We started this story with a pilot sitting in a cockpit, facing a sky filled with enemy aircraft. Now you understand why that pilot survived. He survived because he knew that the old rules of aerial combat did not apply to him. He knew that his aircraft was different, and therefore required different tactics. He knew that the enemy, despite superior numbers and superior individual aircraft, could be defeated through superior strategy and superior discipline. The P-40 Warhawk was never the best fighter of the Second World War. It was not the fastest. It was not the most maneuverable. It could not climb the highest or fly the farthest. But in the hands of pilots who understood asymmetric warfare, it became something more important than the best fighter. It became a weapon that consistently won battles it should have lost. And that, in the end, is all that matters in war. The swarm can be defeated, not by becoming more numerous, not by becoming faster or more agile, but by understanding the battlefield so completely that you transform every disadvantage into an advantage. This is the tactical brilliance of asymmetric warfare. This is the legacy of the P-40 Warhawk.